"You're fired because you're too old." The words hit like a punch to the gut, and for a moment the whole office went quiet. Only the hum of the air conditioner remained, mixed with muffled chuckles from people who couldn't hide their delight. He drew in a deep breath, straightened his back and tried to keep his voice steady, but the blood burned hot, and his hands, though trained by years of work, still shook. "Say that again." "You're fired, Augusto. The company needs people with pace, with fresh vision. You're stuck in the past." The boss spun his chair, crossed his legs, and locked eyes on him as if watching a show. Around them, screens flashed with bright graphs rising and falling, while someone raised a phone under the table. Just a second, just a click, just to remember that moment. The shame had already begun spreading through the hall before the door was even shut. "After 30 years?" Augusto asked, voice almost gone. 30 years that we honor with a severance package. Sign it and take your experience to another place. The company changes, Augusto. You don't." A sharp snap. The white envelope landed on the desk like a sentence. He didn't look at the paper. He looked at his hands. Hands marked with old calluses from starting with storage boxes, then learning routines, then inventing shortcuts, then saving late deliveries. Hands that carried deadlines no intern could hold without breaking. Hands that now didn't know where to rest, pockets, the envelope, or the heart. "At least tell me the truth," he said. "It's not performance, it's age." The boss smiled with his lips, but his eyes stayed cold. "The market is young. Life is fast. We need people who speed up. You slow down." Outside, the team pretended to work, but ears leaned in like antennas. Someone cleared their throat that turned into a snicker. Another whisper. "He said the new system was useless. Can't handle AI. He's a fossil." Augusto's skin burned. He rehearsed a sharp reply, a line of pride, a strike of dignity. Nothing came. Only silence sharp as a blade cutting his throat, and his pride fighting to stay upright. "If you're done," said the boss, "HR will take it from here." "I'm done," Augusto answered, straightening up. "But not the way you think." He lowered his gaze, pocketed the envelope unopened, grabbed the doorknob, and pulled. The hallway lined up like a badly rehearsed play. An intern bit his nail, 2 analysts swapped texts laughing, and the project lead faked an urgent call just to dodge his eyes. Nobody dared whisper, "Stay strong." Nobody. The humiliation had an audience and silent applause. "Your badge, please," the HR analyst said, hand stretched out. Augusto unclipped it with a metallic snap. The badge felt heavier than ever, as if carrying every late shift, every Saturday, every midnight report. "Sign here and here," he signed. The pen scratched the paper with uneasy haste. At the end, the analyst forced a polite smile. "We wish you success. Wish for character," he muttered. The analyst pretended not to hear. In the elevator, the mirror reflected a tired but lifted face. Wrinkles unapologetic for existing, grey hair that had seen contracts fall and rise again, eyes that learned to read people without spreadsheets. Behind him, 2 co-workers rushed in and cut off their talk when they saw him. "Was it now?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other whispered back. "They said he can't keep up." The elevator chimed on the ground floor. Augusto stepped out, the street air hitting his face, and for a second the world seemed too wide. No badge, no desk, no reason for the 9 o'clock coffee. The gate closed behind him with the same sound as every morning, but now it was different, final. The soles of his worn shoes scraped the sidewalk like they were looking for a new rhythm. "How's it going, Mr. Augusto?" the guard asked, unaware. "Nothing a good silence won't fix," he answered with a short nod. At the bus stop, 2 young guys laughed at a video. One spoke too loud. "Sad old man, huh? Keep it down." The other laughed. "Or he'll cry." Augusto breathed, swallowed, didn't reply. The bus arrived, doors opening with a sigh, and in the window the company building gleamed like a trophy too far away. He didn't step in. He walked past the bakery window where sugar-dusted pastries sat on display. Remembered he'd promised to bring one to his granddaughter on Saturday. Simple promises become anchors when the sea gets rough, he thought. He kept walking. At home, the doorbell barely rang before his wife opened it with a tired smile, the kind that knows how to love without words. "You're home early." "I am. Want some coffee?" "Yes." He sat at the table, breathing in the strong aroma. The wall clock ticked mercilessly, reminding him that time doesn't turn back, it only pushes forward. His wife set the cup down, sat across, and held his hand. "Did they mention your age?" "They talked about speed." "And you?" "I walked out slowly so I wouldn't trip over my pride." She gave a faint smile, but her eyes shone. "You are not your badge, Augusto." "I know, but the world forgets." The phone buzzed. Old messages. "Congrats on the delivery. Only you could fix it." All from before, from now, nothing, as if he'd turned invisible. He opened a drawer, pulled out a worn notebook, and with the same steady handwriting he used to train rookies, he wrote, "What I still know." The pen moved almost on its own. Routines, maps, mistakes nobody notices, hidden bottlenecks, shortcuts not in the manuals. In just a few lines, a whole world. In every word, a lifetime of ground walked. "Are you going to find a lawyer?" his wife asked. "Maybe, but not today. Today I just breathe." The landline rang. Rare. On the other end, his son's voice. "Dad, I heard." "Already? News travels fast. Are you okay?" "I am. It only hurts where we pretend it doesn't. Come over for dinner tomorrow. Julia asked about you. I'll bring her a custard roll, the sugared ones. She'll love it." He hung up and stared at the wall, where the window's shadow drew a square of light. Light that shifts places but never stops being light. His heartbeat began to slow. Shame was still there, but strangely, pulse by pulse, it lost strength. The first bitter thought gave way to an older one. "What you build slowly, nobody can steal." He repeated it a few times, like someone tuning the soul. By late afternoon, he stepped out again. Needed to walk so his mind wouldn't stay stuck. He passed a shop closing its doors, heard the owner muttering about suppliers, deadlines, interest. Further on, an empty stationery store. The lady at the counter tapping an old calculator, biting her lip. Augusto stopped, glanced at the display of pens and notebooks, and instinctively measured the flow, the waste, the poorly used window. The old habit of spotting hidden processes poked at him. "Do you need help, sir?" asked the lady politely. "Just looking. If you want, tomorrow we'll have a sale." "What do you sell the most?" "Cheap notebooks. The rest just sits." The display pushes people toward the cheap stuff. If you switch it around, the stock will move. She looked at him, surprised. "You're in the business." "I'm from the time." He smiled and moved on. At the square, teenagers were practicing skateboard tricks. Each fall brought mocking laughter, each landing a shout of victory. Augusto sat on a bench, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the noise of the square wash over his head. He remembered his first day at the company, with only a cheap suit and a huge desire not to fail. He remembered when he sketched a new flow by hand that saved weeks of work and was treated like magic. He remembered, above all, how many times they said, "It won't work," and it did. Why would now be different? The sky began to change colors. He stood, went back home, lit the living room lamp, and opened his notebook again. At the top he wrote, "Plan." The word stood big, centered like it demanded respect. Under it others, "Old contact," "Forgotten supplier," "Map of waste," "Hands-on training." Old ideas still valid, new ideas he never had the time to test. A small arsenal. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number. "Hello? Augusto? It's Renato. Remember me?" The memory opened a drawer. He remembered. A quiet young man he once trained now, from what he had heard, running a small supply company. "I remember. I heard what they did to you. It made me angry. Don't waste it on anger. Then waste it on me. I need help. I'm losing clients and I can't find the leak. Nobody sees it. You do." Augusto looked at the table, the open notebook, the empty cup, the pen begging for another line. He felt his spine straighten by itself, like preparing to lift a familiar weight. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. No glamour, no promises. Just work. Perfect. I'll get the reports ready. Don't bother. Get the truth ready. He hung up, stood in the middle of the room, and noticed the air felt lighter. It wasn't victory. It was a start. The humiliation was still there, but now it had company, a thread of direction. He went to the kitchen, kissed his wife's forehead. Tomorrow morning. Work? Work. It'll be fine. I don't know, but I'll put everything I know on the table. At night, he lay down and listened to the house make its usual sounds, the creaking wood, the wind at the window, the fridge sighing. Sleep came slowly, and before drifting off, he saw the office scene again, the chair spinning, the cold smile, the chuckles in the hallway. The memory stung, and yet, over it, something new rose, stubborn and simple as a brick set firm. The next day at 7:50, Augusto stood in front of Renato's warehouse, a modest facade with faded letters. The gate half stuck, the reception stacked with folders, the punch clock 2 minutes late. He smirked slightly, like meeting old ghosts and deciding to call them by name. "Good morning, Mr. Augusto," said Renato, rushing in. "Do you think you can spot the problem?" "I don't think anything. I measure. And what you measure, you fix." Augusto shifted the notebook to his other hand, drew in a breath, and took his first step inside. Because the door that slammed yesterday sometimes pushes us toward the right one, and on the other side, people were already waiting for answers only someone too old could give. Those who laughed yesterday have no clue what's about to begin. The door at home creaked as he entered. It wasn't just tired wood, it was the echo of shame that walked with him at every step. Augusto took a deep breath, hung his jacket on the same hook as always, but it felt like the clothes no longer had an owner. His wife, waiting in the kitchen, noticed without a word something had broken. "You're home early," she said, trying not to sound worried. "Early enough for someone who should be busy." She stopped stirring the pot. Her eyes, tired but sharp, searched his for an answer. He pulled out the chair, sat slowly, and leaned his elbows on the table. The silence weighed heavy. "It was the age, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice breaking. It was. They didn't say it straight, but they did. The spoon hit the floor, the sound too loud for such a small kitchen. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She only placed her hand on his. That touch felt like the last wall against the world. That night, Augusto could barely eat. The plate was full, but each bite felt like sand in his mouth. On the wall, the clock hands dragged as if mocking him. The TV in the living room played some random show with canned laughter, while the only sound in his head was the phrase hammering, "You're too old." When he lay down, his body begged for sleep, but his mind refused. In the dark, thoughts stabbed like needles. Am I really useless? Did everything I built turn to dust? How will I face the neighbors? What will I tell my daughter? He turned one way, then the other. His wife beside him pretended to sleep so his burden wouldn't grow. But her uneven breathing gave away the anguish she carried too. The next morning, the sound of the gate opening snapped him back to reality. The youngest son came in with his school bag and froze at the door, confused. "Dad, why didn't you go to work?" "Because now I work from home," Augusto answered quickly, trying to soften it. "But you always said only retired people stay at home." "Then it's almost that." The boy dropped his bag and ran to his room. Augusto felt the weight of failure at work, at home, in the image he always wanted to be, a reference. When he went out to buy bread, the stairs burned more than the sun. The baker, curious, asked, "Day off today, Mr. Augusto?" "Day off," he replied, voice dry. On the way back, two neighbors whispered by the gate. The words weren't clear, but the giggles were. With each step, it felt like the whole block already knew. The man who used to leave in a suit at 7 every morning now carried a bag of bread without hurry. His eyes weighed heavier than his shoulders. At home, his eldest daughter called out of the blue, "Dad, are you okay?" He tried to hide it. "I am. Just a setback. I saw messages in the group. They said you got fired. They talked before I could. Don't mind it, Dad. You're worth more than that company." "Worth? The market doesn't think so." She went silent on the line. And in that silence, Augusto felt the sting of being a burden to his children when he always dreamed of being their pride. The following days stretched endlessly. He still woke up early out of habit, but had nowhere to go. He made the bed, brewed coffee, and then just sat by the window watching others rush to work. Cars sped by, people with headphones and briefcases, and him, trapped in an empty routine. His wife tried to cheer him. "Rest a bit, Augusto. You never rested. Rest is a prize." This feels like punishment. At dinner, the food always seemed scarce, even when it was enough, because the taste wasn't rice or beans, it was uncertainty. Each bill on the table felt like a cut, each invoice a weight. He knew the savings wouldn't last long. One afternoon, during a walk, he ran into two ex-co-workers at the square. They glanced at each other and greeted him without much warmth. "So, Augusto, enjoying retirement?" one said with barely hidden irony. "Yeah, something like that." "Well, you know, the market's tough. Only those who keep up survive." They laughed and moved on. Augusto stood still, feeling the ground slip. They weren't just words. They were knives, the kind that don't just cut pride, but tear away faith. He walked home slowly. On the way, he sat on a bench and leaned his head back. The sky was clear, blue, indifferent to men's struggles. Looking at that emptiness, he thought, did my life end here? That night, while tidying the room, his wife found his notebook on the table. She flipped through some pages and saw the notes he had started. Processes, ideas, improvements. A lump formed in her throat. "You still have so much in here," she said, pointing at the notebook. "But no one wants to hear. Someone will. You just need to find who." She closed the notebook, placed it in his hands, and pressed firmly. For a moment, his eyes lit up again, as if remembering that despite the sting of rejection, there was something the layoff couldn't steal: experience. The next morning, Augusto looked at himself in the mirror before heading out to buy the paper. His dark circles were deeper, but his eyes still burned with fire. In the reflection, he whispered, "They threw me out, but they didn't end me." Deep down, he knew the pain of rejection was just the first chapter. The world would still learn that the too old man had more future than many young ones combined. The days crawled by, as if the clock had lost its hurry. Augusto was getting used to the awkward silence of having nowhere to go. He woke up early, brewed coffee, read old papers, but every headline about new startups or young millionaires pushed him deeper into the feeling that the world was moving without him. That Tuesday, though, the landline rang. Rare. The sound echoed through the room like a calling. He answered with a tired voice. "Hello, Mr. Augusto. It's Renato. Do you remember me?" Memory pulled out old images. A skinny, shy young man he had trained in his first years as a manager, always taking notes, always eager to learn, but never fully sure of himself. Augusto gave a faint smile. "I remember, Renato. You were the one always writing everything down." "Yeah, that's me. Listen, I heard what happened to you. It's unfair. The world calls it the market, my boy. Then this market needs fixing, and I think only you can help me." Augusto raised his eyebrows. That sentence lit a small spark. "What's going on?" "My business is going under, Mr. Augusto. It's small. Office supplies. I tried to modernize, hired consultants. Nothing worked. I'm about to shut down. I can't find the mistake, but I remember. You saw problems where nobody else did. You always had a way out." Augusto took a deep breath. The wound from his dismissal still hurt, but hearing someone ask for help stirred something inside. "Renato, you know I'm not young anymore. That's exactly why I want you. People in a rush just run. I need someone who knows how to guide." The silence stretched for a few seconds. His wife, listening at the door, looked at him with hope. "Tomorrow at 8, Augusto said at last. "I'll come by." "Thank you, Mr. Augusto. I won't forget this." The next morning, he was up before sunrise, put on his best press shirt, grabbed his notebook, and walked to the bus stop. Not an expensive suit, not a fancy car, but still the same Augusto who once faced impossible reports and came out on top. When he arrived, he saw Renato's warehouse. A plain facade, faded letters, a squeaky gate. Inside the reception, piles of papers, slow computers, a distracted secretary. Everything screamed disorder. "Good morning, Mr. Augusto." Renato rushed over, slightly out of breath. "It's an honor having you here." "The honor is still being useful. Show me the problem." He walked the corridors and observed. Stock poorly arranged, expensive products hidden behind cheap ones, controls done on outdated spreadsheets, workers without direction, each improvising their own way. It was silent chaos. "Do you think it can be saved?" Renato asked nervously. Augusto smiled lightly. "Yes, but it will hurt." In the days that followed, Augusto dived into work. He asked simple questions that left the staff uneasy. Why is this material here and not there? Who checks the orders? How much time do you lose searching for boxes? The answers didn't match. He wrote everything down quietly, while the team eyed him with suspicion. Some whispered, "What's this old man going to fix?" Just another one who thinks he knows. But little by little, changes started showing. Augusto reorganized the stock, taught control methods, cut hidden waste. Small actions that in a week already showed results. That Friday, the secretary remarked, "Strange, we haven't missed a single delivery this week." "Not strange, natural," Augusto replied. "When you set order, time stretches." Renato's admiration was obvious. "How do you see all this?" "Experience, son. Every mistake here, I've seen somewhere else. Only the address changes." On Sunday night, sitting with his wife, Augusto said, "I feel alive again." "I know. When you walk in, your eyes shine like before." "They thought I was too old, but what they call old, I call stacked wisdom." She smiled. "Then prove it to them." The following Monday, Renato brought reports. "Mr. Augusto, look, our revenue grew in 2 weeks. Small, but still growth." Augusto nodded. "Don't celebrate too soon. The road's still long. Do you think we can really expand? If we stop putting out fires and start building, we can." The shine in Renato's eyes was like that of a student in front of his master. And inside Augusto, something long asleep began to wake, the taste for the fight, the hunger to prove his worth. But not everyone was pleased. An ex-colleague of Augusto, now working with his former boss, heard the rumors. Crossing paths with Augusto at a cafe, he threw poison. "I heard you're playing entrepreneur in some tiny company." "I'm helping where I'm called." "Well, don't think it'll last. You should have just accepted retirement." Augusto didn't reply. He only smiled and went back to his table. But inside, he promised himself, "They'll see." That same day, a supplier called, complaining of late payments. Augusto asked to speak directly. "Who's in charge there?" "Augusto." "Augusto, thought you were already thrown out of the market." "Yeah, they tossed me aside, but even scrap metal has value." On the other end, silence, then nervous laughter. "You always had a sharp tongue. Let's see if you've got fixes too." Augusto hung up and turned to his notebook. He wrote 3 words, "battle plan." He knew this was only the beginning. By the end of that week, the small company was breathing differently. Workers whispered, half amazed, "We're not losing clients anymore." He fixed the stock like it was magic. Could that old man really have that kind of power? Augusto didn't want power. He only wanted dignity. But deep down, he knew. Dignity only comes when you prove the value they tried to erase. And what nobody realized yet was that the spark lit in a forgotten warehouse would ignite a turning point that would change everything. That morning, the warehouse looked the same as always. Peeling walls, the noise of a forklift, the smell of paper dust. But the air felt different. Workers arrived earlier, sneaking glances at the old man already seated, notebook open, pen in hand. Augusto didn't need to shout or force authority. He just watched, and by watching, he found what nobody else saw. "Renato, come here," he called. "What is it, Mr. Augusto? How many orders did we lose last month because of failed deliveries?" "Around 10. It was 32, I counted." Renato's eyes widened. "But how do you know?" "The invoices tossed in the drawer, the clients who never came back, the boxes with no destination in the warehouse." You only look at what's written down. I look at what's been forgotten. Renato went quiet. The crew, listening from a distance, exchanged uneasy looks. Some began to wonder, maybe this old man isn't just stubborn. Maybe he really sees what no one else does. That day, Augusto gathered everyone around a makeshift table. I didn't come here to replace anyone, but if you want to keep getting paid, we need to change now. No one answered. The silence was heavy. Then he pulled out a late order, crumpled at the corner of the desk. This client ordered 5 boxes of reams. He's been waiting 3 weeks. Anyone know why? One scratched his head, another looked away. Nobody spoke. Well, I know. The stock was here, but it was buried behind items that never sell. You're working with no flow, and with no flow you drown. His words were sharp but exact. He grabbed a marker and began sketching on the board. Arrows, steps, responsibilities. In minutes, a new plan was laid out. If you follow this, no order will be late. It's simple, but it takes discipline. The next week, results appeared. The reception phone rang less with complaints and more with new orders. The secretary, surprised, remarked, "Strange. No one called to complain today." Augusto smiled. "That's not strange. That's normal finally showing up." Renato walked through the warehouse with shining eyes. "Mr. Augusto, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Just work." Inside, though, Augusto felt his chest pound. For the first time since his dismissal, he tasted victory. Small, quiet, but victory. One afternoon, Renato brought in a visitor, a long-time client about to cancel. "Mr. Augusto, this is Mr. Elias. He wants to know why he should keep doing business with us." Elias folded his arms, doubtful. "Convince me. I'm tired of empty promises." Augusto drew a deep breath. There were no fancy slides, no flashy numbers, just a whiteboard and his pen. "Mr. Elias, I won't promise you anything. I'll show you." He picked up a box from stock, flipped through his notes and said, "The delay in your last order wasn't a product shortage. It was a process failure. I've already fixed it. Today, if you order 10 boxes, I can tell you exactly where they are, how long it'll take, and who will deliver." He did the math in front of them, checked inventory, laid out the timing. Elias, who came frowning, gradually softened. "You speak with certainty. I speak with experience. Whoever has failed enough learns not to repeat." By the end of the meeting, Elias shook Renato's hand. "I'll give you another chance. If it works, I'll renew the contract." When the client left, Renato was nearly speechless. "You have no idea what you just did. That contract keeps this company alive. Then make sure it's not the only one. Grow new lungs." The news spread fast. The next day, an old colleague from Augusto's former job crossed him on the street. Well, I heard you're playing consultant for some tiny company." "I'm not playing. I'm working. But in a small business, isn't that a downgrade?" Augusto smirked. "It's training, and training always prepares you for the real game." The colleague laughed with disdain and left, but the words stayed. He didn't know it yet, but Augusto was already back on the board. The changes continued. Augusto set up weekly reviews, cleaned up spreadsheets, trained staff to spot mistakes before they turned into disasters. In just over a month, the little company not only stopped losing clients, it gained new ones. On closing Monday, Renato ran in with the report. "Mr. Augusto, look at this. We grew 20% this month. Good, but don't fool yourself. Fast growth is easy. The hard part is growing with structure." Renato nodded, keeping the words. He knew that man didn't talk to impress. He spoke to prepare. That night, Augusto went home lighter. Sitting on the porch, notebook in his lap, he wrote a line. "It's not age that defines you. It's usefulness." He read it aloud and smiled. "They threw away what they couldn't understand, but I still have strength." His wife approached with coffee. "I can see it in your eyes." "What?" "The glow. You're coming back." He drew a deep breath, looked up at the starry sky and thought, if they believe they buried me, they're in for a surprise. I was only being planted. And in that moment, for the first time, Augusto realized what he carried wasn't the weight of the past. It was an arsenal for the future. The following weeks were full of hard work. The warehouse, once messy, now ran in order. Orders shipped on time. Clients started to trust again. But along with the first signs of progress came the sideways stares. One rainy afternoon, Augusto left early to settle a matter with suppliers. At the corner cafe, he heard the unmistakable sound of laughter behind him. Slowly, he turned and saw 3 ex-co-workers, all still at the company that had thrown him out. One of them, the cockiest, wasted no time. "Well, look at that!" The veteran turned into a teacher for a tiny company. His tone dripped with irony. "The market must be desperate," another one added, laughing. "They called someone who should already be retired." Augusto stayed silent. Not because he lacked a reply, but because he had learned silence can cut sharper than words. Still, inside, each laugh was a stone thrown at his pride. "Hey, Augusto," the third mocked, "when you get tired of playing businessman, come back and ask for an internship. Maybe we'll find you a trainee spot." The laughter echoed through the cafe, mixed with clinking cups. Augusto raised his eyes steady and said, "You're laughing now. But remember this, a tree that looks dry can bear fruit at the right time." For a second, silence sliced the air. They looked at each other and laughed again, but the unease was already planted. Back at the small company, Renata was waiting, restless. "Mr. Augusto, I had a meeting with a supplier this morning. They heard you're with us, and they didn't like it. They didn't. They said you've got a reputation for being outdated, that I should look for fresh blood." Augusto inhaled slowly. "That's not criticism. That's fear. Fear of what? Fear that I'll prove experience is worth more than youth with no direction." Renato seemed torn between worry and faith. "Doesn't it bother you, all the things they say?" "Of course it does, but I've learned the best answer is results." Time passed, and results kept coming. But the more the small company grew, the more Augusto's former boss grew irritated. At a meeting with investors, he joked, "Imagine this. The employee I fired for being too old is now the savior of a failing business." The market is full of comedies. Laughter spread, but one investor, curious, asked, "And if it's not comedy, what if he really is turning things around?" The boss grinned, but his eyes turned hard. "If that old man pulls it off, I'll swallow my tie." Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, resistance was growing too. One of the younger supervisors, bothered by Augusto's presence, began to sabotage him. He hid reports, delayed deliveries, left out information. Until one morning, Augusto noticed, "Carlos, why wasn't this order entered into the system?" "Oh, must have been a mistake at reception." "Reception doesn't touch the system. It was you." The silence gave him away. Carlos tried to justify, "It's just, I think you make things too complicated. The market today is faster. It doesn't need so many steps. Fast without foundation falls harder. You think I'm in the way? I think you should let us work our own way." The room turned heavy. The others watched, waiting for the outcome. Augusto didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, picked up the spreadsheet, and showed the flaws. "See this line? That mistake cost 4 days of delay. This other one? 2 lost clients. This isn't complication, Carlos. It's prevention. You can laugh at my method now, but what I do keeps you from crying later." Carlos lowered his eyes. The team, silent, understood the lesson. Despite the criticism, one truth no one could deny. The company was breathing like never before. A client who had already decided to switch suppliers came back and signed a bigger contract. Renato could hardly believe it. "Mr. Augusto, I've never seen anything like this." "You've never seen it because no one ever taught you to. But now don't stop. Growth brings enemies, and enemies are already knocking." And they were. The following week, Augusto's old boss sent a message through a supplier. "Tell Augusto his place is at home. If he keeps meddling, there'll be war." When Renato relayed the message, Augusto closed his notebook slowly. "War? Then let it be war. But I don't fight with weapons, I fight with work." Renato hesitated. "Do you think you can handle it?" "I don't think. I know. I've faced worse." That night at home, his wife noticed he was deep in thought. "They're trying to bring you down again, aren't they?" "They are. And are you going to back off?" "No. Backing off only proves them right. I'm not the disposable old man they imagined." She held his hand and smiled. "Then show them." The next days were tense. Suspicious suppliers, clients testing limits, rumors spreading. But Augusto kept the same pace. Watching, writing, fixing. Every insult became fuel. Every mockery became proof he was on the right track. And even with all the pushback, the truth was starting to show. The too old man was, bit by bit, tearing down the walls they tried to build against him. The boss still hadn't shown all his cards. Behind the scenes, he was setting up a strike to choke Renato's small company. And Augusto knew the next battle would be decisive. The tension grew by the day. The former boss pulled strings in the market, trying to cut off suppliers, delay shipments, and even spread rumors that Renato's business had no future. It was as if a shadow loomed over the warehouse. That morning, the mood was heavy. Renato walked into Augusto's office, eyes restless. "Mr. Augusto, we lost 2 suppliers. They said they can't sell to us anymore. But I know his hand is in this." Augusto calmly flipped through the notes in his notebook, like a man not easily shaken. "If he closed one door, we'll open another. But where? We're cornered." "You only feel cornered when you look forward and forget to look sideways." Renato frowned, confused. "Explain." "The market has layers, my boy. He targets the big ones, but forgets the small. Local suppliers, overlooked, hungry for a chance. And we're going to give them one." That same week, Augusto visited 3 modest warehouses, almost invisible on the big players' radar. He spoke face-to-face with owners who had never received real attention, explained processes, showed calculations, proved he could bring consistency in exchange for partnership. One owner, skeptical, said, "Nobody pays attention to us, Mr. Augusto." "Why would you?" "Because I know what it's like to be thrown aside, and someone who's been discarded values opportunity." The man fell silent, moved. He shook Augusto's hand firmly. "Let's do business." Back at the warehouse, Renato was stunned. "You got 3 new suppliers in 1 week. That's not a miracle. That's vision. While they look up, I look down. The market's like a chessboard. The winner is the one who spots the pieces others ignore." The staff began looking at him differently. No longer just a stubborn old man. Now they saw someone who could flip the game with simple, bold ideas. But Augusto didn't stop there. He designed an even bolder plan. On Friday evening, he gathered the team. "Listen, our edge won't be price. It'll be trust. If we promise 3 days, we deliver in 2. If we promise 24 hours, we deliver in 12. "But that's impossible," exclaimed Carlos, the supervisor who once opposed him. "Impossible is staying the way we were. We'll reorganize shifts, optimize delivery routes, anticipate orders. We'll set such a high standard, the market will wonder how a small company pulls off what the giants can't." Renato's eyes widened. "This could change everything." "This will change everything," Augusto said firmly. The work began. He redrew transport flows, negotiated with independent drivers, set up double-check systems in stock control. It was tiring, detailed, exhausting, but every adjustment was a brick in a strong foundation. In the first test month, the results were astonishing. 90% of orders delivered ahead of schedule. Clients started talking. Word spread. Companies that had never heard of Renato's warehouse began calling, curious to try. One day, in the middle of the rush, Renato entered with an incredulous smile. "Mr. Augusto, we just signed a contract with a stationery chain. They said they've never seen delivery this fast." "Good. Now keep it. Growth is easy. The hard part is keeping it steady." The team celebrated, but Augusto stayed calm. Inside, he felt the fire reignite. This wasn't just about saving a small business. It was about proving, to himself and to the world, that he still had worth. Of course, the news reached his old boss. At a board meeting, he exploded. "How did that old man pull this off? I threw him out. He should be forgotten." One director tried to calm him. "It seems he found gaps we didn't see." "Gaps?" the boss shouted. "This is an insult. He can't rise after the humiliation he suffered here." His fury only grew, and with it, his fear that Augusto was becoming more than a threat. Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, Augusto was already drawing the next step. He called Renato and showed a diagram scribbled in his notebook. "Look at this. If we expand online with a simple ordering platform, we can double our client base in 6 months. But that's expensive. What's expensive is not doing it. Nowadays, if you're not digital, you don't exist." Renato hesitated, but trusted him. Together they built a basic platform, simple but functional. In no time, new clients began appearing. Small shops, schools, even mid-sized businesses. The company's name spread like a secret worth sharing. They deliver fast, keep their word, and have someone experienced behind it. That night, Augusto came home exhausted, but with a sparkle in his eyes his wife recognized. "You look like a different man." "I'm remembering who I've always been. They thought I was dead weight, but I only needed space to prove otherwise." He closed his notebook, drew a deep breath, and whispered, "Now the game will truly turn." The visionary plan was already in motion, and while the rivals still tried to figure out how to stop him, Augusto had already set up his next move. The man once branded too old was now about to prove that wisdom and vision, when paired with discipline, are weapons no enemy can resist. The small company's growth was too sharp to go unnoticed. Within months, clients once bound to the old boss's firm were slipping away, drawn by the discipline and flawless deliveries Augusto had put in place. And that was exactly when the war began. On a Monday morning, Renato burst into the office, face pale. "Mr. Augusto, we've received a notice." "From who?" "The suppliers' union. They're claiming irregularities in our operation." Augusto lifted his eyes slowly, closed his notebook and replied calmly, "That's not the union. That's his hand." Renato knew exactly who he meant, the old boss. That week, rumors spread through the market. They said Renato's firm didn't pay on time, used second-rate products, and was risky to contract with. Some clients even called, worried. One was blunt. "If you don't clear this up, we'll suspend orders." Augusto didn't flinch. "Then come tomorrow at 8. I'll show you everything." The next day, the client came in doubtful but left impressed. Augusto opened spreadsheets, showed timelines, proved quality. Everything was there, organized to the last detail. "If you're lying, you lie with perfection," the client said before signing a renewal. "I don't lie, I just work right." But the attacks didn't stop. Days later, one of the delivery trucks was mysteriously held up by inspectors. Papers in order, nothing wrong, but hours wasted. In the end, one inspector muttered, "Someone powerful is pulling strings." By the time the truck arrived, the client had already walked away. A clean loss. Renato was in despair. "He's going to suffocate us, Mr. Augusto, only if we let him. But how do we fight back? By resisting. If he blocks the road, we take the side path. If he shuts the door, we climb through the window." Augusto gathered the team. "Listen, they want to bring us down, but they won't. There's only one way to win this war. Be so good even enemies can't deny it." The employees, once doubtful, now listened intently. The respect he had earned was solid. Yet the war escalated. The old boss began offering absurd discounts to lure clients back, prices impossible to match. Renato nearly collapsed. "If we match that, we'll go broke. We don't need to match it, we need to show value." Augusto crafted a new plan, win loyalty with personalized packages. Instead of price wars, they offered trust and predictability, scheduled deliveries, immediate support, weekly reports, things the boss had never offered. At first, many clients hesitated, but soon they saw paying a little more for peace of mind was better than relying on empty promises. One afternoon, the boss himself called Renato. His voice dripped venom. "You think you can compete with me? You're mistaken. I built this market. You're just a kid, and that old man you brought is dead weight. Before Renato could answer, Augusto picked up the phone. "This is the deadweight speaking. If you built this market, then you should know. Weak foundations always collapse." On the other end, silence, then a dry laugh. "You'll regret coming back, Augusto. I already regretted once, wasting too much time helping people who didn't deserve it. Now I regret nothing." After that call, the attacks grew harsher. A supplier suddenly cut ties. A big client froze purchases without explanation. Even a bank refused to renew credit, citing high risk. Renato was ready to crumble. "I don't know if I can take it anymore, Mr. Augusto." "Then learn. The only difference between those who win and those who lose is who survives the storm." That same night, Augusto stayed alone in the warehouse. He walked the silent aisles, ran his hand over the boxes, breathed the smell of paper, listened to the old building creak. It felt like the place was listening back. "They want to bury us," he muttered, "but they don't know we're growing roots." He sat at the desk, opened his notebook, and began sketching something new, a plan bolder than all before. He didn't just want to endure, he wanted to flip the game once and for all. The next morning, he presented the idea to Renato and the team. "We're going to expand." Expand? Renato almost fell from his chair. "But we're being strangled." "Exactly. They expect us to retreat. We're going to advance." The plan was to launch a line of custom products tailored for schools and offices needing something unique, not just selling paper and supplies, offering complete solutions. Renato stared at the sketch on the board, stunned. "This is madness. Madness is staying on their battlefield. We're changing the rules of the game." While the old boss wasted energy trying to destroy, Augusto was creating. While they closed doors, he was opening new avenues. Resistance had turned into strategy. The quiet war no longer felt one-sided. For the first time, Renato believed they weren't just surviving, they were winning. But Augusto knew the final clash was still coming. The boss would never accept defeat. The next move would be decisive. The invitation arrived on a cold morning, a plain envelope, but carrying the weight of war. Inside it read, "Investors Meeting, Presentation of Proposals for Merger and Sector Expansion." Renato's company was listed among the participants, and just below it, the name of the giant run by the old boss. Renato nearly dropped the paper. "Mr. Augusto, this is suicide. He'll be there. Then that's exactly where we need to be. But he'll crush us in front of everyone, only if we allow it." On the scheduled day, the hall was packed. Men and women in suits, investors from all regions, reporters watching every detail. At the center, a stage with large screens and microphones. The old boss was already seated in the front row, his cold smile framed by a perfect tie. When he saw Augusto walk in beside Renato, he raised his brows and let out a loud laugh. "I can't believe this." The dinosaur decided to show up. "Come to say goodbye to the market." Some chuckled. Others just stared curiously. Augusto didn't answer. He adjusted the notebook under his arm and sat down calmly. The meeting began with polished presentations. Companies flaunted flashy slides, optimistic projections, inflated numbers. Every chart was a performance. The old boss was called up and climbed the stage confidently. His voice rang with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, my company represents solidity, innovation, and leadership. We've got decades in this market and are ready for a new phase. Whoever invests with us will have guaranteed returns." Applause, satisfied nods. He stepped down, convinced he had already won. "Next presentation, R&R Supplies," announced the host. The hall hushed. Many hadn't even heard the name. Augusto stood slowly, handed the notebook to Renato, and walked to the stage. Whispers rose. "Who is that?" "A veteran who should have been long gone." Augusto gripped the microphone. No slides, no spectacle, just him, steady eyes, and a voice loaded with conviction. "Good afternoon. I don't bring colorful graphs. I won't promise miracle profits. I'll tell you facts." A ripple went through the crowd. He continued, 6 months ago, this company was about to shut down, losing clients, delaying deliveries, barely holding on. That's when I was called. Old, they said, outdated, useless. But what many call old age, I call accumulated experience. Some investors leaned forward, listening. In a few months, we reorganized processes, won clients back, and rebuilt what big companies forgot: trust. We don't compete on price. We compete on keeping our word. And that's why we're here. He opened the notebook and showed plain numbers, handwritten. On-time delivery rate, 95%. Monthly growth, 20%. Clients renewing contracts because they realized promises don't pay bills. Discipline does. Absolute silence. The old boss began shifting in his seat. You want returns? Invest in those who do the basics with excellence. Trends fade. Experience remains. He closed the notebook and stared directly at the investors. Today, we're not asking for favors. We're offering partnership. If you want growth with solid ground, come with us. If you want spectacle, choose someone else. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then applause started, timid at first, but swelling stronger. Some even stood. Augusto gave a slight nod of thanks and stepped down. The old boss couldn't stand it. He jumped up and shouted before everyone, "This is cheap theater. He's a discarded employee. I fired him because he was slow, old, outdated. You'll trust him?" The hall stirred. Augusto turned slowly, faced him and replied calmly, "You did fire me, that's true. Said I was too old. And today, right here before everyone, I say, thank you. If you hadn't thrown me out, I wouldn't have discovered how much I still had to give." Murmurs erupted through the room. The boss turned red, choking on his own fury. That's when the bomb dropped. The president of the investors board stood and declared, "Mr. Augusto, gentlemen of R&R, we'd like to meet in private. We're interested in a merger with significant backing." The old boss nearly fell out of his chair. "With them? That's a joke. They don't have structure for big contracts." The president cut him off, firm. "Maybe that's exactly why they're interesting. They have discipline, they have results, and the market needs people who keep their word." Outside, reporters surrounded Augusto. "How do you explain this success?" "Simple. I didn't need endless youth or shiny machines. All I needed was character, discipline, and the will to work." As the flashes popped, the old boss stormed out without looking back. The man who once said, "You're too old," was now forced to watch the most humiliating scene of his life, the discarded one returning not as an employee, but as a potential partner in something bigger. That night, Augusto came home in silence. His wife waited with dinner. He sat down, took off his jacket and smiled, weary but light. "How was it?" she asked. Today they heard what they never wanted to. That age is not weakness. It's stored strength. She clasped his hand, and the two sat there in peace. For the first time in years, the weight of shame had been replaced by the lightness of victory. But Augusto knew one last step still remained. Winning wasn't enough. The world had to see that dignity never retires. The merger contract was signed weeks after the meeting. The news spread like wildfire. Newspapers, business sites, even local radio stations reported on the miracle of the old manager who turned a struggling firm into an attractive force for investors. At the front of the new headquarters, a modest building, freshly renovated with a redesigned logo, there was constant movement. Smiling employees, deliveries leaving on time, customers coming and going satisfied. What once was a forgotten warehouse now pulsed with life. And at the center of it all was Augusto. On the day the partnership was officially announced, the hall was packed. Investors, employees, families. With tears in his eyes, Renato took the stage and declared, "If we're standing here today, it's because of one man everyone once called too old. But it was his experience that saved us. I'm proud to announce that Augusto is not just our mentor, he is now a partner in this company." The applause thundered. Employees stood, some crying. Augusto, standing tall, looked at everyone with a blend of pride and humility. He took the microphone and spoke simply, "I didn't come chasing titles. I came chasing dignity, and I discovered that dignity is earned every day when we refuse to stop proving our worth." Across town, the old boss read the news in a folded paper. His coffee grew cold on the table, his hand shaking with rage. He muttered under his breath, "No, this can't be real." The directors nearby avoided his eyes. The impossible had happened. The man he had tossed aside now stood shoulder to shoulder with the very investors who once listened only to him. Meanwhile, Augusto experienced something new: respect from the neighborhood. At the bakery, where he once endured pitying looks, he now heard greetings. "Good morning, Mr. Augusto," the baker said warmly. "Saw your photo in the paper. You're an inspiration to us." Augusto smirked softly. "Don't call me sir. I'm just someone who refused to stop." At the plaza, neighbors approached to shake his hand. Even the two women who once gossiped behind the gate now looked at him with admiration. The weight of rejection had turned into a currency of respect. But the most striking scene came when he ran into old co-workers downtown, the same three who once mocked him in the cafe. The silence was thick. One finally stammered, "Augusto, heard you're a partner now." "You heard right. Look, we didn't think it would turn out like this." "Of course you didn't. People who only see the surface never understand the depth." They dropped their eyes, ashamed. Augusto no longer needed to prove anything. Respect came on its own. Inside the new firm, transformation was visible. Employees who once doubted him now followed his guidance with discipline. Carlos, the supervisor who once tried to sabotage him, approached with humility. "I was wrong. Thought your ideas were overcomplicated. But you saw what no one else could." "Don't apologize to me, Carlos. Prove it by working the right way." Carlos nodded, grateful. At home, the family felt the change too. The youngest son, who once asked why his father didn't go to work anymore, now bragged proudly at school. "My dad owns a company." One evening at dinner, his wife said with emotion, "You came back different. Not just respected, more alive. Because I rediscovered my purpose. They tried to bury me, but they forgot a buried seed grows roots." The partnership brought not just money, but peace. Augusto no longer needed to prove himself to others, but he made sure to prove one thing to himself: that it's never too late to begin again. He walked through the new headquarters, greeting every worker by name. He stopped to listen, to teach, to guide. There was no rush, only presence, and that presence inspired. At a talk for young entrepreneurs, someone asked, "What lesson do you leave us?" He looked straight ahead and replied, "Never underestimate experience. The world chases the new and forgets the essential, but the essential never ages. Discipline, character, and the will to keep learning." The audience rose to their feet in applause. Meanwhile, the old boss withered. He had lost clients, lost credibility, lost the trust of his own investors. The halls that once echoed with his voice were now cold, silent. And what ate at him most was knowing that the man he called too old had become the example of the future. Augusto, however, held no grudges, only the certainty that he had won. On a calm night, sitting with his wife on the porch, he looked at the starry sky and said, "You know what I've learned?" "What?" "That dignity never retires, and it's never too late to prove we still have value." She held his hand, and they sat quietly together, because the greatest victory isn't applauded by the world, but felt deep within the heart. The office was quiet. The employees had already gone home, the company lights partly dimmed, but Augusto remained seated in his new partner's chair. On the desk lay the notebook that had been with him since the day of his dismissal. He ran his fingers over the scribbled pages, each line carrying sweat, pain, and now triumph. He drew a deep breath. For a moment, the sound of the past echoed in his mind. "You're fired because you're too old." Those words, once a wound, now felt like a springboard. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. The reflection in the glass showed the image of a man who didn't give up, a man who proved that experience isn't a burden, it's wings. The following week, Augusto was invited to speak at a business event. There were no flashy screens, no rehearsed speeches, Just him and an auditorium filled with young people, adults and even retirees, eager to hear his story. He stepped onto the stage slowly, holding his faithful notebook. He adjusted the microphone and began. When they told me I was too old, I thought it was the end. I was humiliated in front of everyone, but I discovered that sometimes the end is only the beginning. Eyes locked on him. The room fell silent. Many of you here are afraid of time. Afraid of aging, of being discarded, of not fitting in. I was too, but I learned that the value of a man or a woman isn't in their age, but in their character. The world may try to dim your light, but if you insist on shining, even the darkness is forced to step back. The audience began clapping. He raised his hand, asking for calm. What once broke me was the laughter of those who didn't believe in me, but what lifted me was the faith not to quit. I didn't need to be the youngest, the fastest, or the trendiest. I needed to stay true to what I know how to do well. His words echoed powerfully. Young entrepreneurs scribbled notes. Middle-aged men and women wiped their eyes, as if seeing their own struggles reflected in his. Never underestimate experience. Never accept it when they tell you you're no longer valuable. Those who carry discipline and willpower don't grow old. They grow stronger. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Some stood, others cried, and deep inside, Augusto's heart finally felt peace. This wasn't just about business. It was about dignity. Back home, sitting with his wife on the porch, Augusto summed it up. The greatest lesson of my life is that no one else can say when our time is over, only we can. She smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder and replied, "And your time is only just beginning. Age is not a sentence, it's a tool. Experience is not a delay, it's an advantage. Today's humiliation can be the foundation of tomorrow's victory. The one cast aside can return stronger, the underestimated can surprise, and the one called too old can one day sit at the table as a partner, not as an employee. And now, one question remains for you listening to this story. How many times have they told you that you couldn't? How many times did they laugh, doubt you, or push you aside? If this story touched you, write in the comments, "I still have value." That will show you refuse to stay silent before the voices that try to bring you down. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because in the end, every story like Augusto's reminds us of something simple yet powerful. Dignity never retires.